are you going to talk? 2 minutes? Okay.
Okay.
You can leave anytime you want in the middle of this story. Okay?
This is hilarious. I've already hit go. No. Yes. Hang on, you're good. We'll get that part out. All righty. Okay.
I am Jeanne Bouchard, and I am going to give the family history of my dad and what it was like to be in the military as a family. Okay, Dad's name. Dad is George Joseph LaFountain, but he went by Joe. And he was born in Townsend, Massachusetts in 1912. There were 12 in his family, but only 6 survived. It was during the Depression, and that was it. So my dad had a 4th grade education, and because some of you who have lived through the Depression will know, he had to go to work. So he worked in an ice house, and he cut trees and did everything he could. He joined the Army when he was 17. He still worked at the ice house when he wasn't on base, and he also worked at the roller skating in Wayland, Massachusetts. And that's where he met our mom, Jane. Well, her real name is Noemi Jeanne LaFountain, but she always went by Jane. And that's where they met, and they got married in 1937 on Thanksgiving Day. So I was born a year later, and then we were at Fort Devens, but I was born at Fort Banks because at that time Fort Devens didn't have a hospital. So that's the reason. And when I was a little over 1 year old is when we got to move around quite a bit. So when my dad, the first place we went was Anniston, Alabama. Now, we're from the north, and so my mom went to wash our clothes because we didn't have a washing machine, and the sign said at the washateria, whites only. So my mom only washed the white clothes. And she came home, and my dad said, "How come you didn't wash the colored clothes?" And then she said, because there was a sign on the door that says, coloreds, whites only. And she had no idea what that meant. So that was my first time to be around colored people. But my dad and my mom always taught me they were to be treated just like I would treat anyone else. Now, I was only 4 at the time, so, but because my mom wasn't always well, my dad hired a black lady, and I actually walked across a bridge that was probably less than 14 inches wide to catch a bus, but I did it all by myself when I was in kindergarten. So and it was raining real hard, and I got them all wet, and I was scared to go home because but that was our first. And then from there we went to we went to
it was another base, but I can't tell you because, like I said, I was not that old. So that one thing I remember about being on that base, we had a real severe storm, and all our electricity went out, and we had gone trick-or-treating, and my mom had taken the canned goods out because she says, I gotta find us something to eat. And my dad came home, and my dad says, don't bother to put the cans back because we have to be in Tacoma, Washington in 1 week. So my dad bought a car, because at that time we didn't even have a car, and we drove to Tacoma, Washington. We got to the motel. My dad got up the next day to go to work, and the car had 4 flat tires. So I was in first grade there, and then we knew the war was coming, so we really didn't have much choice. My mom and I had one brother who is next to me. He's only 14 months younger than I am. We had to go back to Massachusetts and live with my grandparents. And while my dad was at school, and then the war came, and so we stayed with my grandparents. While we were there, this one was born, Jimmy.
What was Dad's rank?
At that time,
Yeah.
he was only a sergeant.
Okay.
But
he was an enlisted man.
But then they sent him to officers' candidate school, so he went in as an officer.
Okay.
Because
That's when he went to school.
that's when he went to school.
Okay.
So then he was born, and my grandparents had kerosene stoves, and he was probably about that time. He was just barely walking, and he found a glass next to the kerosene thing, and so he decided to drink it. So which burned the whole inside of his stomach. And this, of course, was during World War II, and there was not a lot of medicines around, and we didn't think he was going to make it. So my mom, my grandmother, and somebody was with him until he got better. So he did get better, and we thank the Lord for that. So then my dad, like I said, during the war, we really heard from my dad. He wrote letters. They were VA letters, just small things, but getting letters back home was very hard. And it was very hard on my mom. So anyway, while we were there, my grandpa says, okay, he would get his little red wagon out, and every week we lived in, they're French Canadian, but we lived in an Italian neighborhood. So every week I had to take my little red wagon and go and pick up bottles, cans, newspapers, tires, anything, and then my grandpa would take them to, because that's what we did during the war. We helped out. So the story about my dad, like I said, he was with Patton as soon as we went over there. He was in Africa. He was in Sicily. He was in one other, he was in Anzio. Okay, he was in Anzio. And then they went over during D-Day. Now my dad's job was, because once they got over there, well, and anywhere he was with them, was if the tank wouldn't run, my dad's job was to go out and look at the tank and say, we need to destroy this, or he would send it to be repaired. That was my dad's job. Once they got there, if you ever seen the movie Patton, you can see some of the stuff, but it was elaborated. They tried to get the fuel so they could run those tanks as far as they could. Not only was my dad there, 3 of my mom's brothers were tank drivers. They were also there. And one of my uncles, in the Life magazine, showed Patton in front of the tanks, and it was my uncle in the tank. So if somebody wants to look up Life magazine, they can find it, but it was taken after the Battle of the Bulge. And so we're real proud of that. And one of her other brothers was a submariner. So that was all a family thing. So during the Battle of the Bulge, my dad went out in his Jeep, and he said, this is what he told me. He said, for some reason, I stopped the Jeep and I went to the bathroom. But he didn't realize somebody had thrown 2 grenades in his Jeep in the back. And the Jeep exploded, so that's how he lost his hearing. So during the Battle of the Bulge, nobody knew where the lines were. They just moved around. They moved around. Here it would be the Americans, and the next thing you know, it was the Germans and everything else. So my dad got caught behind the lines, and a family in Belgium hid him for a week before he could get back to his unit. So that's the story of my dad, and he also got the Bronze Star. I don't know if you want to include the thing on the Bronze Star or not.
Yeah, and this is your story. This is your story. And his story, this is definitely.
We have the information if you want to add it to it. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
So that is basically what happened. Then my dad came home after the war, and in 1946, January, my mom was able to go over to be with my dad. My dad was a military governor in several counties. So this one and my other brother, we're on a ship, and my mom is very ill. She just got very sick. So I'm trying to take care of her little one here and the other brother. But my other brother, so he knew how to get to the dining room by himself, which I didn't know he knew how to do, except I couldn't find him. He had gone down 4 flights because this was a troop ship, and he was sitting in a cafeteria, and they were giving him food.
Is that where the term military break came in?
Yes.
So, of course, he was in big trouble, and I attached a leash to him because I couldn't keep up with everything. So I just attached him to a leash, and he wasn't very happy with me. So the ship
but in the meantime, we were in a hurricane at sea for 4 days. And that's partly why my mom was so sick. I mean, that ship was rocking. And this was not a cruise ship. This was a regular.
How old were you when?
I was 8. Yeah. So, and I've always asked them. I've always been responsible for them. So, but anyway, we got to.
She's always been like a general.
So when we got to Brenham, my dad was supposed to come and pick us up, but he couldn't for some reason. And so we got on a train and we went to Geeson. That was our first station there. While I was there, unfortunately, you have to understand, Germany was, most places was pretty much bombed out. People were picking up bricks and making little houses, and it was not a good time. And 4 of my classmates were out playing, and they found some ammunition that did not get exploded, and one died, and the other 3 were sent back in critical condition because they exploded. So even though you can tell kids don't do things, they did. So I lost 3 of my classmates that year. And of course, my dad had already told me this is not something I needed to go out and do. But we were housed in the Nazis' homes with all their things in there. And we had to have guards because they were breaking in the houses. And that was the reason we had to have guards. But when my mom put the trash out, kids would come in and eat out of the garbage can. So my mom made sure when we put the garbage out. Now, we had a maid, we had a houseman, and then we had someone else that did the yard and stuff. But the government paid for that because that was part of being over there. So my mom would take a newspaper and she would put oranges and apples and stuff so the kids could have something to eat. So we just, so that was our first assignment. And then, the one thing about when we got there, we didn't have Christmas at home. We had Christmas with my dad because it was the first of the year. And my dad bought a huge train set for the boys, and it went around the Christmas tree. And that's what we had. So then from Gießen, we went to Augsburg, and my dad was a governor there, and my youngest brother was born there. And so we were there probably a year, not quite a year. Then the next thing I know, we're moving again. So then we were sent to Kamp, Germany, which is 10 miles from the Czechoslovakian border. And by then, I pretty much knew what was going on. And also, my dad liberated the Haston concentration camp. So right after we got to Germany, he says, I'm taking you somewhere. And he took me to a small concentration camp. No more inmates, but the gas chamber was there, and there was blood on the wall. The barracks were really in bad shape, and there was a room full. I mean, it was like this whole house and bigger of shoes, and I remember remember standing there and thinking, because there was everything from baby shoes to grown-up shoes. And I remember standing there thinking, those were people. And my dad, this is what my dad said, remember this day, because people will say it never happened. And when they liberated the Belsen concentration camps, there were still inmates there, and they were nothing but skeleton. And of course, being Americans, the first thing they want to do is feed them, but you can't. The medics got there as soon as they could, because they had to be on special diets, and some of them died. And that was real hard on those that were liberated in that camp. So the Germans weren't there, but they just ran away. But everybody else was still. Where were they going to go? You know. So, but to this day, I remember being there. So then we go to this little town called Caen, and by then I was almost 10, and so we live in a 36-room castle. We have a picture we'll show you. And my job was to put the American flag out in the morning and to bring it down at night. And because the nearest school was a 200-mile trip, they hired a governess. And I had a governess. And I did schoolwork and sent it back to the States. And then I went to German school too. So I was pretty much, and the only books I had to read, this is the picture of the castle we were in. Take a picture of it. And then, so I did both, and then, so the only books I could read were paperback books that were used in World War II, and they were this way. At one time, the castle was where the soldiers had free time and stuff, but they just left them there. So you have to remember, nobody was killing, like nobody was fishing or hunting or anything during the war. I mean, that wasn't quite possible. But there was you couldn't go to town and buy meat. So we had this huge cooler in this castle. So my dad killed or caught everything as far as meat was concerned. And we would go fishing in streams that were probably less than 12 inches wide and maybe this deep, so about 2.5 inches. And we could catch 50 trout in 1 hour. And my dad would just get us sticks and put strings on them, and we'd all go fishing in this little stream. And then we'd take them home, and the cook would cook them. So my dad killed deer, wild boar, ducks, and that was the meat that we had. Now, my mom would go to a commissary, which was about 250 miles away. She would go and buy 300 pounds of flour and take it down to the bakery, and they would make our bread. So that's how we got by. And because we're Catholic and the church had gotten partially burned, the people there always wanted just to say they wanted us to sit in one place. And my dad says, no, we're just regular people, we're coming to church. But that didn't always work because the people would get it. They were just. So, I have an article, because I loved the soccer. I would go to all the soccer games, and I also worked with some of the kids at their YMCA and stuff like that. There's a huge article written about me when I left, so we have that article also. But that was just, so the Czech generals would come once a month, and because the border was closed, my dad's job, he had an interpreter that spoke 11 different languages. So everybody had to come, when they crossed the border, they had to be checked out, and anybody they thought, as I said, the Nuremberg trials were not until 1948, and they were still trying to find the Nazis. So, anyway, that's the story. And so one day I was never supposed to leave the compound without a guard, but everybody knew who I was, and one day I decided to go to town, and without the guard, and 2 men came after me, and all the people in town just went after them like crazy because they knew who I was. So I was real lucky, but I mean, I was 10 years old, so yeah.
Had big trouble when you got home.
Oh yeah, no more trouble than you know. But and so that's what it was like living in Germany. But we every place we lived, we each had a suitcase packed because they did not know. We were there for all 3 Berlin airlifts, and we had a private plane ready when we were in Com. We had a private plane ready to take us out. Scary.
So when did you guys come back from Germany?
We came back in 1948. We went to Fort Bragg and then came here. Yep.
And Dad was here in 49.
49 we came to Fort Hood. It was Camp Hood
It
then.
was Camp Hood.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But he didn't stay here. I know that they bought property and they were planning on staying here, but Dad went back overseas.
No.
No?
He went to school. He had to go back to school.
Okay, but
So-
Janet was in Germany.
That's the second time.
The second time, that was in 50,
Well, that's what I'm saying. He went
53.
back overseas
Yeah, in 52.
after he was
52,
stationed.
53.
Yeah.
Huh?
We were stationed here, and we lived in Cove, and it was Camp Hood then, and then the Korean War broke out, and because there were then 6 of us. There's 6 of us.
59.
Yeah, but Joanne was
Yeah,
born,
but Joanne wasn't one.
Yeah, well, I wasn't born to 52. Well, yeah,
Yeah, you were a baby.
I was a baby.
Yeah, I know, because I had you.
Oh, okay, don't talk about those things, okay? I'm paying you back now.
Okay. So, anyway, we were here in 52, the Korean War broke out, and the commanding general had my dad's orders changed because he said that was too large of a family to go, for him to go back to over there. And so we went back to Germany, and that's a whole different story. So I was a freshman in high school. I was going to a private school in San Antonio, and my parents were going to leave me here, but I said, no way. So, no, I was not. I was not happy in a private school with all those rich people. I've never been around all these rich people. So I said, I said, well, then I'll just run away. So they had no choice but to take me. So, no, they didn't. I'm sorry. So, anyway, I get to Germany, and I'm a freshman in high school. So, I'm living in, at that time, I was living in Göppingen, Germany. So, guess what I got to do? I got to get on a train every Sunday and go to Munich. And I stayed in the dorm, and on Friday I'd go home. And I did this every week. I did it the rest of my freshman year and my sophomore year.
And what was in Munich?
Munich, there was, they had a high school there, but we stayed in old German houses. The freshmen and sophomores, girls stayed in, and then there was a junior and senior girls in the same with the boys. So we had that. So we would all be riding the train, or most of us, and so we were very protective of one another. It was just, the boys made sure that the girls were not bothered, and it's like, so all our meals were at the mess hall. That's where we had our meals, and we just, So my junior year, we got stationed in Stuttgart, and I was able to go to right there. So the story is that there was only 42 juniors, and I was real lucky because I had an American history teacher who was a war correspondent during World War II, and I learned more about art, architecture, and all the other stuff because she did world history, but she also did American history at the same time, and she taught us architecture, art, music, and I think I was probably the most fortunate because she was, we had good teachers. A lot of the teachers that were over there wanted to go there, but it's just one of the things. Also, during that time, my dad, in '52, was asked to integrate the blacks, and they used the small base because they didn't know what kind of problems they were going to have. And
We actually lived in a German house too there because our family was so big we couldn't live on the base. In Göppingen, we actually lived in a German house.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the story. He was the one who was able. They wanted it to do it on a small base because, like I said, because they didn't know. So when I moved to Stuttgart, my best friend there, her father was the general on base in Stuttgart, and there is a protocol for phones when somebody calls, and I was expecting her to call me, and it was the general, and I said, George Washington's residence, Martha speaking. So he said, this is General Charles, and I went, yes, sir. He says, can I speak to your father? And I said, yes, sir. So I knew I was going to be in big trouble, but I never said anything to my dad. So that weekend we were at the officers club, and the general came up to me and he says, hi Martha, how are you? And I said, I'm fine, General. And all night long the general called me Martha. So my dad's saying to me, why is he calling you Martha? I said, Dad, I never told him this story. I said, I don't know, Dad. Because I knew I would be in so much trouble. And I would have, it was just a spur of the moment thing, and I was expecting my friend to call me. But anyway, that's a true story, and I'm sticking to it. But I never told it. Never. And so then I came back and I went to Cove my senior year. There were a whole 13 of us.
What year did you graduate from Cove?
1956. And so, my graduation present from my dad, he got his high school diploma from his school, and he gave it to me as my gift.
Oh, that's so neat.
Yeah, it really was. So I graduated and I went to Dallas and to the secretary school, and I worked there. In the meantime, my dad got out of the Army, and he decided that he was going to have a Army surplus store, and he bought a barracks, and he put it out on Highway 190, and if I came home from Dallas, I had to sit there while he did, and he bought a lot of surplus things, but he finally, he ended up with 17 buildings, and I am not joking you, people would come 200 miles to spend the day because he had everything you could imagine. And and one time I was married to a captain then, she was married to a helicopter captain, and they were both in the uniforms. And the truck came in, and the sergeant sat on the steps, and I asked him, I said, can I help you? Because I had come with my husband and brought my 2 children with me. And he says, no. And I says, oh, okay. He says, I've never seen 2 captains work before, and I'm going to sit here while they empty the truck. And that's a true story.
That's so funny. What am I doing? I said, just unload the truck, okay?
So, when my parents came here, there wasn't a Catholic church here, and we used to have to go on base. So my parents, after I had left and I was working in Dallas, my parents decided to have Mass in our house, which there wasn't that many people here. You have to remember, when we came here, there was only 380 people in Copper's Cove. Yeah. So then,
What does the city limit sign say? 356?
256. Yeah.
But anyway, so then they bought an old mess hall and moved it. I don't know if you're familiar with Cove, but anyway, they made it into a church. The front part was the church, and the back part was the social hall. And they worked very hard getting that all done. I was the first one to get married in that church. And then,
What year was that?
in 1957.
I have the dates on that.
Yeah, no, I think it's 1957. Anyway, then 1963,
1963 is when
when
the church was finished.
yeah,
I think they started in 62.
they donated 5 acres, and that's Holy Family Church now. So they have always been very thankful. So
You've been pretty involved with the
yeah,
church.
and so in 1970, Dad died in
1971,
but before,
October 19th.
yeah, but before that, he was Anyway, he got cancer, and
Yeah.
so he was treated out at Darnell, and
Brooke. Also,
so yeah, but
the
they
other
moved on. But he actually, and so the general who was in charge of Fort Hood at the time, General Smith, told the people at Darnell that he was to have the best of care. They gave us a room where we could all stay in and out, and
But
He-
Dad and General Smith had served together, and he admired my dad. At the time, I think my dad was his officer at one time or something.
no, he
But I know
served
that.
under Dad. He
Yes.
served under
Yeah.
Yeah, he was his commanding officer at one time, and they had gotten really, really close. I know because after Dad died, because Dennis was in Vietnam, General Smith came by and saw me 3 or 4 times.
He come to see Dad every day at the hospital.
Oh, I know that, yeah.
And he really got some good care. You know, when a general walks in there to your room every day. They took good care of my dad.
Yeah.
So General Smith, much for the pallbearers, he found everyone. He found of every rank my dad had, and they served as the pallbearer. And I was standing room only when my dad died. He was well liked.
He's an honorable man.
Yeah, and what they did when we had my dad's hardware store, Western Auto, Home Lumber, and one other. Gibson was doing some. Anyway, if they didn't have it, they told them where to go to get it. They all did it. It was just what they did.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is. So before my dad died, we took him to see Patton, and we asked him, the movie, right? And he said, "This is what he said. They sure did clean up the language." And that was true. Now, they didn't have to go through what I did, but when I was growing up, my dad, I had to read 3 books a week, and I had to do a book report. And then he would do things like, he would pick up the salt and pepper shaker, and he would say, "I wonder where pepper comes from. I wonder where salt comes from." And I knew I had to have the answer, and that wasn't, we didn't have encyclopedias. I had to go to the library to get it. And that was his way of, and and when we went to Italy, I went to Italy with my mom and dad. She had a distant cousin in Italy, so we went there. That was 1947. So we went to Italy, and we got lost. And first of all, we had to take 3. We had to take 3 gasoline cans, because the only place you could get gas was where there was a military outfit. You couldn't get one. I mean, that's just the way it was. And everything in Italy, you didn't get a whole lot of meat. You got a lot of spaghetti, but not a lot of. But anyway, we got lost in the Alps. And my mom spoke French, I spoke German, and my dad only spoke English. So he tells my mom, ask them how much for the meal and the plates. So they're standing there trying to talk to my mom in French, and she's trying to understand them too, because this wasn't else. And because he wanted to buy the place, which was the original willow china. Okay, we still have it, but anyway. So my mom and I loved the blood oranges, and you could just pick, you would just stop on the road and just go buy the oranges. Well, we were throwing peels out the window. And we get to Venice, and at that time, everybody was throwing their garbage in the canals. It was filthy. We didn't stay but 2 days because it really was very dirty at that time. And we're sitting in the gondola, and all these oranges come. And I look at my dad and I go, I think this is where you'd lose my trail. But he got back to me when we got to Pisa. So at that time, you could still go in the tower. So I said to him, oh, I want to go in the tower. He says, okay, you can go. And so it's like a spiral stairway, and it was in May. And I get up there, and there's a guy with earmuffs on. And then I turn around, and he rings the bell in that whole tower. I thought the tower was going to fall down. And I'm the only one up there, right? And I wanted to run all the way down, but I didn't dare because I thought the tower was going to fall. And I get down there, and my dad says, how was it? Because he knew what was going to happen to me, but he didn't tell me. He didn't tell me. And I remember when I was a sophomore, I read From Here to Eternity. My dad comes up to me and he says, the book had just come out. He says, what are you reading? And I says, From Here to Eternity. He says, does it have any redeeming quality? And I said, no, Dad, it doesn't. He said, oh, okay. But he didn't tell me I couldn't finish reading it. But he wanted me to tell him I knew it wasn't. And that's just how it was. So, and that's the way it is.
Well, just as a closing thought, I mean, I have 3 children of military family here. Do you guys have like some closing thoughts on being the child, growing up in the military?
Myself, I was a baby when my dad retired, but having lived in a military area and having been married to a career military man, I will tell you, my kids love the fact that we're all adventurous. We are not going to stay 25 miles around our radius. We want to see the rest of the world, and we want to interact with other people. We have a love of adventure, and I think our parents gave us that.
You definitely had an adventure.
You have no idea what our life adventure is like. Even to this year, it's been a pretty amazing year as a family. We are all super close. There isn't a month that I don't speak to my siblings.
That's awesome.
Okay, even at this age.
I mean,
I see them all every year.
we try very hard to at least twice a year all to get together. And we play pinochle and we play for blood. We don't
we do have at least 2 large family gatherings every year. Now we have the next generation and
That's
the
you guys over there.
following generation that are trying to make as many of those gatherings as they can, which says a lot for a large family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think our parents installed a lot of love into our adventure in our world.
That's awesome.
We were taught to, the 3 things that I remember about my dad was when I was 7, he used to do a crossword puzzle in ink, and he would leave the easiest ones and put them down and say, you have to fill them in.
Awesome.
Yeah, and that's why we have a love for puzzles. But we were always taught to be, the main thing we were taught as growing up is remember to be kind to others and to remember we were poor, but we didn't know it.
Dad was a very, very smart man. He had no education and went in the Army. He got all his education in the Army. He started off as a private, got all his education in the Army, and retired lieutenant colonel. So he worked his way up through the ranks and studied very hard. And he was always teaching us something. And we didn't realize that until we got older in life, that he was always teaching us, you know.
Something about the Jeep.
You have to tell that story.
He bought a Jeep one time and he got the wrong
Okay, this is Army surplus.
Army surplus. He got the wrong number on the Jeep. So he bought this Jeep that had been run over by a tank.
But did not.
But he brought that thing home and he sold pieces off that Jeep until he got his money back. But he kept track of every nickel that he got from that Jeep till he got his money back. He wanted to prove to us that he's going to get his money back.
He was going to make lemonade out of that lemon.
Yeah, right. But he was always teaching us something, always. You remember so much of that now, you know, that he was always trying to make you learn something. He was very smart man, very smart.
He did a lot. It sounds like he changed the world a lot, too.
He did, and he when he was in Gießen, this was right after the war, he had a bus stolen out of his motor pool, and Stars and Stripe had this huge article saying, and showed my dad looking for the bus under the bed, and it was found in the Russian zone. So that was a big deal because at that time the Russians didn't want the Americans in there. So they had to do a lot of negotiation before they got the bus back, but yep.
Wow.
The Russians stole it and ransomed it.
No, we don't have, we never.
Are y'all telling military secrets here? Should I turn this camera off at this point?
But you know, my dad, if he had to go visit like a factory or stuff, he did have an interpreter, but sometimes he would take me because I was speaking fluent German, and then when we get home, he'd say, "Now, what do they really say?" And a lot of people did not know that I spoke German at the time.
Oh, okay, cool.
They just thought I was his daughter, and you know. So I was.
This is a picture of my dad, if you want.
Yeah, I'm gonna get some close-up of all these pictures.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank this entire family and everybody who's not here.
You were hoping?
Yes, and I truly, truly appreciate you sharing your world with us. This is exactly what we're looking for.
Well, and I was hoping because.
Yeah, and I'm gonna hit this off.
Yeah, if you look on the wall above your head.